Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Abhineet Shukla and with me is Purnima Saman Karakoti, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi leaves for Tokyo to attend state funeral of former Japan Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Indian Prime Minister to also hold talks with his Japan counterpart Fumio Kishida in Tokyo. Peace-loving India should not be mistaken as being afraid of war, says Indian Defence Minister Rajnath Singh. At least 13 killed in school shooting in Russia, including 5 children. Russian President Vladimir Putin denounces inhuman terrorist attack. Italy set to get its first woman Prime Minister as far-right leader Giorgia Meloni claims victory in national election. US and South Korea begin joint naval drills after North Korea's missile test. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi left for Tokyo tonight to participate in the state funeral of former Prime Minister of Japan Shinzo Abe. Ahead of his departure, Mr. Modi in a tweet today conveyed his heartfelt condolences to Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and Mrs. Abe on behalf of all the Indians. The Indian Prime Minister termed Shinzo Abe a dear friend and a great champion of India-Japan friendship. He said, work will continue to further strengthen India-Japan relations as envisioned by Shinzo Abe. The state funeral of Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated on 8th of July in the city of Nara during a campaign speech, will take place on Tuesday. India had announced one day of national mourning on 9th of July as a mark of respect to Shinzo Abe. Briefing media in New Delhi on the visit, Foreign Secretary Vinay Mohan Kwatra said the ceremony will be held at Budokan Air Arena, which will be followed by a greeting occasion at Akasaka Palace in Tokyo.
This visit by Prime Minister Modi will be an opportunity for him to honor the memory of former Prime Minister Abe, who he considered a dear friend and a great champion of India-Japan relationship. Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Abe had developed a personal bond of trust and friendship through their numerous meetings and interactions spanning over a decade, beginning from Prime Minister Modi's visit to Japan in 2007 as the then Chief Minister of Gujarat.
Mr. Kwatra said representatives from over 100 countries and more than 20 heads of state are expected to participate in the state funeral. These include Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, US Vice President Kamala Harris and South Korean Prime Minister Han Duck-soo. Mr. Modi will also meet his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida during the visit. The Foreign Secretary said it will be an opportunity for the two leaders to reaffirm their commitment to further strengthening India-Japan special strategic and global partnership.
Japan is one of the most trusted and valued strategic partners of India. The two sides are committed to strengthening bilateral partnership in key areas that include trade and investment, defense and security, climate change, health security, infrastructure, digital space, industrial development, energy, and critical and emerging technologies and human resources, among others. There is a deep convergence in our visions of Indo-Pacific region, and there is close cooperation between our countries on issues of international importance.
Our correspondent has filed this report.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the former Japanese PM had developed a personal bond of trust and friendship through their numerous meetings and interactions spanning over a decade. The two leaders made enormous contributions to India-Japan ties and were singularly responsible for elevating India-Japan relations to the status of special, strategic and global partnership in 2014. Shinzo Abe made significant contributions to deepening India-Japan relations, turning the largely economic relationship into a broad, strategic and comprehensive partnership. This visit will be an opportunity for Prime Minister Modi to honor the memory of the former Japanese Prime Minister, who he considered a dear friend and a great champion of India-Japan relationship. With Dipendra Kumar, Suparna Sayya, AIR News, Delhi.
Japan has imposed tight security measures in the capital city Tokyo as it prepares to host foreign dignitaries for the state funeral of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Top-level security measures will be deployed at the state-funded event on Tuesday, equivalent to those adapted during the Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games, with a police presence exceeding 18,000 personnel.
Indian Defence Minister Rajnath Singh asserted that India is a peace-loving country, but it should not be mistaken with being cowardly or afraid of war. Mr. Singh was speaking at a felicitation ceremony held in Kangla district for the brave soldiers of the Indian Armed Forces hailing from state of Himachal Pradesh. The minister said, India is the only country which has given the message of peace to the whole world, and its military is respected across the globe for its bravery. The Indian Defence Minister assured people of the country that if any attempt is ever made to disturb the harmony in India, a befitting reply will be given. India's Information and Broadcasting Ministry has banned and suspended 10 YouTube channels. Information and Broadcasting Minister of India Anurag Thakur said these YouTube channels were spreading misinformation, trying to sabotage ties with friendly countries and detrimental to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country. In today's Hotspot section, we bring for you a discussion on India's bid for UN Security Council getting a strong backing. In conversation are former diplomat Manjeev Puri and AIR correspondent Kaushik Roy.
As India is celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav and also the United Nations is into its 77th year as the 77th UN GA is still on, how do you look at reforms in the United Nations?
I completely share your sentiment that 75 years or 77 years is adequate time to recognize the need for adjusting to changed reality. When the United Nations was formed in 1945, there were only 51 members. Today there are 193. The world has seen decolonization. The world has seen the end of the Cold War. And let me be very clear, the world has seen the rise of developing countries. This includes India, of course includes China. And so there's a shift from the transatlantic balance to the Indo-Pacific. Does this not require that the greatest and most important instrument of international governance, the United Nations, as well as the Bretton Woods institutions, adjust to this change? Now let me say a word about India. India was not favored in 1945, although we were a chartered member, by any kind of grandfathering in terms of a permanent membership of the Security Council. Perhaps understandable, we were a colony. We were also not the largest developing country. There was China, which was larger than us. But next year, India will become the largest country in the world in terms of people. We will be among the 3 or 4 largest economies in the world. And so, think about it from the perspective not just of India, but of the world, that doesn't it behove the world and the institutions of international governance that India should be inside the tent, i.e. de jure contributing to a better world and for the benefit of humankind through global good. I think the time has come. The time had come some time back also, but the situation is such that I think today even the naysayers as well as the current powers that be would be benefited by having a country like India and several others who are in the G4 to be inside the tent, because the global need of the hour is far greater heft than what they can provide only by themselves.
Yes, absolutely, Ambassador. Sir, I'd also like to know from you that recently after the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Samarkand, and when Prime Minister Modi said that this is not the time for war, rather today's era is not of war, there has been a lot of outpouring of support for India's permanent membership in the United Nations Security Council, and in fact world leaders including President Biden have supported this move. And as you mentioned that the UN Security Council should be expanded and India must find its rightful place. So what does India do to reach that particular stage?
Mr. Roy, the fact that this is the time to wage peace, I think cannot go unnoticed.
Right.
I'm glad that what the Prime Minister said was echoed by President Macron. President Biden also mentioned it. The U.S. State Department National Security Advisor mentioned it. Look, we are facing major challenges, whether it's climate change, the need for sustainability, and several other things, and we've just gone through the COVID pandemic.
Right.
Surely we don't need old-fashioned stuff like war and hegemony. So this is a call which is not just timely, but which reminds people that let's be focused on our planet, on what is the global good, for humankind as such. Now, India's unique position in terms of the Committee of Nations, which is striving for this change to reflect contemporary reality, is being increasingly recognized by everyone in the world. We are doing our bit along with at least 3 other countries which form the group of 4, which includes Brazil, Japan and Germany.
Right,
2
sir.
major powers in the world, economic powers, which were left out at the end of the Second World War, being losers in that war. But things have changed, and frankly speaking, this change must come through sooner rather than later.
Right,
You
sir.
asked me the question, what can we do? We have a good global coalition, both in the group of 4, which are countries which seriously coalesce a large amount of power across the world. We also have a large number of small developing countries, including island states, in the L69 who also want to see a change in the permanent membership of the Security Council, essentially in the power structure of the Security Council. But, we also need to reckon with reality. There are middle income or middling countries in the world which are loath to see a few go ahead. This includes countries even in our neighborhood. They would try to block any kind of reform. On the other hand, while individually, other than one, most of the permanent members echo support for India or even ideas of reform, the fact of the matter is, other than articulating once in a while, they're not really willing to make the great effort. Because if
True.
they did, then even the recalcitrant would be forced to think through.
Right,
It
sir.
is a haul, it's a long haul, but let me say this, India is perhaps best positioned because we not just meet the criteria, but there is a great recognition that frankly having us inside the structures would benefit the structures and in fact the powers that be today rather than having us out.
There have been questions from certain quarters about the veto power of the Security Council because all the P5 members, they enjoy veto power, and we have seen how it is used on many occasions. And there have been calls for a relook at veto powers, especially in the 21st century. What is your opinion on that, since you have very closely worked in the United Nations system?
Well, Mr. Roy, when the United Nations was created in 1945, this veto power was given to the 5 countries, 3 of them victors of World War I, 1 a former colonial power, I'm referring to France, and 1, let me say, the others in the world or representative of the others in the world, the largest developing country, China. Now, why did this happen? It happened because the experiences of international governance from before that, the League of Nations, were not very good because this sort of power to block was extended to a large number. So, in a sense, it was victory for the winners. They took it and, well, they've run with the world for 75 years. Is veto good or bad? Look, I come from India, where I believe that at the end of the day, it can't be just one country blocking things. Who are the countries who've been casting the vetoes? The United States, mostly in defense of Israel. The Chinese, in defense of North Korea. The Russians, in defense of several of their interests. Let me also tell you that India, took a big hit in 1948 with the Security Council making resolutions on Kashmir. And later on, much of this didn't go through because at least one of the major powers ensured that the Security Council would not move any kind of resolution against India. So it's not just casting the veto, but the threat of the veto, which matters. We've lost out and benefited.
Right, sir. And I would also like to know from you that at the 75th UNGA, when it was a virtual General Assembly, when addressing it, the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi said that it was time for reforms, and not only in the Security Council, but it is felt that the United Nations itself needs to reform itself. I would like to know your take on this, Ambassador.
So, Mr. Roy, the ideas that there should be reform across the board in the United Nations is not just obvious, but again reflects contemporary reality.
Right, sir.
When we look at the Security Council and its polarity-oriented system of veto, permanent membership, etc., that's one heavyweight side of decision-making. But there are so many other elements. It is how you make contributions, who are the people who man the principal administrative post there, how do decisions get taken, how much of inclusiveness is there. Let me give you one example. When the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs mentioned at the turn of the century, they were an articulation by the Secretary General. No doubt a good articulation, which was in the interest of humankind. But was that really the way of going about it? Didn't it require that the large committee of nations in the General Assembly at least debate them and then go ahead and give a go-ahead for it? Ideally, negotiate them among each other. Well, when it came to the Sustainable Development Goals, many people would have liked that the Sustainable Development Goals reflect the priorities in the year 2015 of basically the developed world, climate change, etc. And hunger, poverty, education, nutrition would perhaps have been relegated. But the developing world came together. And this is the beauty of the system of the United Nations. While polarity has its own place, but in the larger things which require a global buy-in, we have inclusivity and we have the question of bringing everyone together. They may not agree, but they've been participating in the process, and hence there's a de jure sanction to what gets agreed, the Sustainable Development Goals being an outstanding example.
And as you rightly mentioned about the global commons and also India's take on those global commons, how India has been doing its own bit to take on climate change and other issues, and also India's links with small developing island nations and these things. The mantra today, some say, would be perform, reform and transform. What would you like to add to that, sir?
I completely agree with you there. You know, reform and transform are two sides of one coin. As far as perform is concerned, let me make one point for your listener. The United Nations is not global government, but global governance. So perform is really for all of us as a collective committee. Of course, we have set up structures of common endeavor like the United Nations Development Program, like various other institutional arrangements allow for collaborative action, and we must act together out there. But reform is that of the structures of global governance. And if they start reflecting contemporary reality, would they not be in a better position to A, understand, and B, respond to the contemporary needs of humankind?
And on that note, we thank you so much for joining us in this lively discussion. Thank you, Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri.
Mr. Roy, thank you.
This is All India Radio, giving you the world news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter @AIR News Alerts.
In Russia, at least 13 people were killed, including 5 children, in a shooting at a school in the city of Izhevsk in central part of the country. Russia's investigative committee said the attacker, who was said to be wearing clothes with Nazi symbols, committed suicide. His identity is currently being established. Russia's Interior Ministry said about 20 people were also injured in the attack. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday denounced an inhuman terrorist attack at a school in Izhevsk. Talking to reporters, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said President Putin deeply mourns the deaths of people and children at a school where there was a terrorist attack by a person who apparently belongs to a neo-fascist group. In Italy, Giorgia Meloni won a clear majority in the national elections, setting herself up to become the country's first female prime minister to head country's first far-right-led government since World War II. According to media reports, the alliance claimed over 43% votes, which would translate to 114 seats in the Senate. A political party needs 104 seats to claim a majority in the Italian Senate. We have a report.
In a political culture of machismo, the victory of Giorgia Meloni and her party, the Brothers of Italy, is a remarkable achievement. She will be the first woman to lead the government, as 30 men have served as the Prime Minister before her since the proclamation of the Italian Republic in 1946. Meloni was born in Garbatella, a working-class area of Rome, on 15th January 1977. She entered politics at the age of 15 in 1992, joining the neo-fascist social movement, a group with pronounced sympathy for Benito Mussolini, the country's dictator from 1925 to 1945. She also served as a youth minister in Berlusconi's 2008 to 2011 government before founding the Brothers of Italy in 2012. Meloni has already broken barriers, as she was the youngest cabinet minister in Italy's history. After her victory, Meloni has promised that her government would work for everyone. Swati Rakheja for World News.
South Korea and the United States began their first combined naval exercise near the peninsula in 5 years on Monday. The drills come a day after nuclear-armed North Korea conducted another ballistic missile launch, the latest in its record-breaking blitz of weapons tests this year. South Korea's Navy, in a statement, said the 4-day exercise on South Korea's east coast will involve more than 20 vessels and an assortment of aircraft which will conduct drills on anti-ship and anti-submarine warfare operations, tactical maneuvers and other maritime operations.
Over the past 75 years since independence, India's largest public service broadcaster, All India Radio, has been the proverbial storyteller for crores of people across the country. All India Radio is celebrating 75 years of freedom with the series Azad Bharat Ki Baat Akashvani ke Saath. It showcases the journey of India since independence in various walks of life through the storytelling of All India Radio. In Monday's episode, we bring you the story of Vocal for Local campaign, which aims to build a self-reliant India.
From an increased focus on Indian firms for public procurement to offering tax incentives to foreign and Indian companies for local manufacturing, the government has raised its Vocal for Local pitch. Vocal for Local has become the latest trending slogan which has emerged during the COVID-19 pandemic. The idea behind this movement finds its root in the Swadeshi movement, which was promoted by Mahatma Gandhi and popularized in 1905 during the Indian independence struggle. It was seen as a way to imbibe the feeling of nationalism and nationalistic pride among Indians. The aim of the Vocal for Local campaign is to promote local industries and consume local wherever possible so that the long-term effects of an increase in demand can be used to develop the domestic industries and make them gradually self-reliant. Economic analyst Puneet Jain says the pitch of Vocal for Local will help in the upscaling of production and eventually make India a manufacturing center for the world, thereby aiding the country's aim to become a $5 trillion economy by 2025.
So government's campaign to boost manufacturing in India through its campaign Vocal for Local has actually many benefits. It generates a lot of employment within the country and of course it helps us to manage our import and reduce our dependence on other economies. We need to develop local industries, the small and medium enterprises which employ a lot of people. They depend on local manufacturing, on local companies which sell goods and services within India. The main target of course is employment. It also helps to generate revenues within India which will help us in managing the macroeconomic situation. If we have a very strong domestic manufacturing base, then we are also able to export those goods and services to the other parts of the world to become a $5 trillion economy in 2 to 3 years.
Vocal for Local gives unequivocal importance to the domestic industries and the small-scale shops and stores. This movement can also be seen as an impetus to boost demand and hence to throw a lifeline to the small and marginal domestic industries which are struggling to survive in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. If demand shifts in favor of domestic companies, then the advantage is threefold. First, it will reduce dependence on foreign products and cut down on the import pressure. Second, it will give a fighting chance to domestic companies to survive through the crisis period. Third, it will place India in a strategic position to emerge as the new manufacturing center of the world. Also, the slogan Vocal for Local does not only mean that the products should be made in India, but the promotion of those products should take place so as to make those products competitive. During his Independence Day address in 2020, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, mindset of free India should be Vocal for Local. He raised a clarion call to the citizens of Vocal for Local, one of the most potent slogans the country has heard in the last 50 years.
हम अपने लघु उद्योगों को सशक्त करेंगे, हम सब लोकल के लिए वोकल बनेंगे और हम ज्यादा इनोवेट करेंगे, एम्पावर करेंगे अपने युवाओं को, महिलाओं को, आदिवासियों, दिव्यांगों को, दलितों को, गरीबों को, गांव को, पिछड़ों को, हर किसी को। आज भारत ने असाधारण गति से असंभव को संभव किया है। इसी इच्छा शक्ति, इसी लगन, इसी जज्बे के साथ प्रत्येक भारतीय को आगे बढ़ना है। 21वीं सदी का ये तीसरा दशक हमारे सपनों को पूरा करने का दशक होना चाहिए।
An extension of this slogan is Local for Global, that local products in India should have global appeal and reach. Come, let's make Vocal for Local our Jeevan Mantra and take our country to unprecedented heights during this Amrit Kaal.
भर में तू मचाए ज्ञान का ये उपहार। मोबाइल पे आजादी क्वेस्ट आया आजादी का इतिहास। डाउनलोड कर रे आजादी क्वेस्ट, ये लो जीतो ढेरों इनाम। मौका पाए जुड़ने का रेडियो और डीडी के साथ। सिर्फ खेल नहीं उत्सव है, आजादी का अमृत महोत्सव है। आजादी का अमृत महोत्सव है।
डाउनलोड करें आजादी क्वेस्ट ऐप और पाएं ढेरों इनाम।
The Sensex and the Nifty today witnessed losses of more than 1.5%. A report from the business desk.
The Sensex plunged 954 points to close at 57,145. The Nifty also declined 311 points to end at 17,016. At the global stock market, shares in the Asia Pacific fell sharply as negative sentiments continues to weigh in on the markets. South Korea's Kospi tumbled 3% and Japan's Nikkei plunged 2.7%. Singapore's Straits Times ended 1.4% down. China's Shanghai Composite Index lost 1.2% and Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index fell 0.4%. European shares were down in the intraday trade. Oil prices fell for a second day on fears of low fuel demand from an expected global recession sparked by rising worldwide interest rates. In the intraday trade, Brent crude was trading at $85.35 per barrel. And in the forex market, the domestic currency closed at 81 rupees and 62 paise against the American unit. Nishit Kumar for World News, All India Radio.
In Pakistan, at least 6 army officials, including 2 majors, have been killed in a helicopter crash in Balochistan on Sunday evening. In a statement, the Pakistan Army said the helicopter crashed during a mission near Khost in Harnai area of Balochistan. On 1st August, a Pakistan Army helicopter had crashed with 6 people on board.
A special flight carrying 55 Afghan Sikh minorities fleeing Afghanistan arrived at the Delhi airport on Sunday as part of the Government of India's efforts to evacuate distressed minorities from the Taliban-led nation. Upon arrival, the Sikh refugees thanked the Indian government, which gave them urgent visas and helped them reach Delhi. Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The New York Times writes that Germany's Chancellor has a lot for Ukraine, but no better tanks. Washington Post reports that as disaster hits the Philippines again, a farmer's sorrow reveals the stakes. The Guardian writes that Hong Kong's Cardinal Zen goes on trial over fund defending protesters. South China Morning Post reports says Sheikh Qaradawi, Islamist champion of Arab revolts, critic of 9/11 attacks, dies at 96. The Financial Times observes that IMF bailouts hit record high as global economic outlook worsens. The Japan Times says Japan simplifies COVID-19 tracking to focus on elderly and high-risk people. A quick look at the headlines once again. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi leaves for Tokyo to attend state funeral of former Japan Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Indian Prime Minister to also hold talks with his Japan counterpart Fumio Kishida in Tokyo. Peace-loving India should not be mistaken as being afraid of war, says Indian Defence Minister Rajnath Singh. At least 13 killed in school shooting in Russia, including 5 children, Russian President Vladimir Putin denounces inhuman terrorist attack. Italy set to get its first woman Prime Minister as far-right leader Giorgia Meloni claims victory in national election. US and South Korea begin joint naval drills after North Korea's missile test. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan Vaishnav Jan by artists from Cyprus. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.